Hi, I'm Jeff, the SP Spaz, back for another exciting video. And before I go any further, I wanted to say the reason that I decided to call myself the SP Spaz for these videos was because I was inspired by the guys who call themselves the NF Geeks. And it reminded me when I thought about personality types, there was an old Saturday Night Live sketch. Old is relative, but it was from the early '90s, I think. And the setting was it was a game show where all the contestants were like jocks, like football players or something, and the game show was called Geek, Dweeb, or Spaz. And the concept was like there'd be these guys up on the podium or whatever it was, and they had to say something about themselves or answer questions or whatever it was, and then the jock guys had to guess whether that individual was a geek, dweeb, or spaz. And years later, when I started reading about personality types and people started, referring to certain things as being common behavior of like NFs or NTs and stuff, and making those associations of which personality or which temperament kind of tended to do, activities that were stereotyped with certain names, it started to make sense to me who the geeks, dweebs, and spazzes were. Um, and of course then that made me think, well, they left somebody out because they left out the nerds. And so the NTs are the nerds, the NFs are the geeks, the dweebs are the SJs, and the spazzes are the SPs, which if you think about, what those words commonly refer to, it kind of makes sense. Not that somebody within any of those other temperaments hasn't ever been called any of those things or called themselves, something that doesn't necessarily line up. But it just made sense to me to kind of do it that way, so I decided if I was going to respond to videos by the NF Geeks, well, it made sense that, me and my invisible partner would be the SP Spazzes. So, and I've always been kind of a loner, so it's just I'm all you can handle. All right, so this particular video I wanted to do as a response to the video that was done, I guess, well, more than a year ago now, but it was a Valentine's Day series that the NF Geeks did. And with sharing love about the temperaments, or what they loved about each temperament. And so this one was the SP love, and most of what they said in the video was just kind of positive experiences and things, stories about SPs that they knew or encountered, and so it's kind of a feel-good video. You can watch it and just enjoy hearing those experiences. So I don't really have a lot to like answer or refute or anything they said, but maybe a couple of things they said sort of triggered an idea in my head, and that was to kind of do a video about the myths or stereotypes of SPs that may not be entirely accurate, and then kind of talk about what the truth actually is of what really binds SPs, what makes us tick, kind of thing. So, I think the thing that stood out to me, and I sort of have a story behind this, because I guess I should start with how I was introduced to personality type stuff in the first place, and that kind of leads into that, because it was actually my mom who somehow happened across the book, the original Please Understand Me by David Kersey, who, of course, he sort of combined a couple different typology systems. Now, the Myers-Briggs is the most well-known, typology test and typing system, at least in America, and maybe around the world. And he took that, and then he also had researched a lot of stuff about ancient ideas of the four temperaments that, and over again throughout history. And through different philosophers, different scientists, or people that studied thinking in psychology and human nature and stuff, had continuously come up with this idea that there were basically 4 types of people, and they had all kinds of different names that they assigned to those groups. Some of them much more occupation based. What were the things that they were in charge of in a village or a society, and then some more mental, more about like or even like about what fluid supposedly dominated. You had a temperament system that labeled people phlegmatic or choleric, and names like that, that had to do with bodily fluids and things. So a lot of different names for those things, but he noticed that there was this consistency of 4 groups showing up, regardless of what they were called. And that's sort of where the 4 temperaments idea came from. So what David Kersey did was he sort of matched the temperaments to the Myers-Briggs, letter system of the 16 types, which of course itself had originated from Carl Jung's, psychological types that he came up with, or that he came up with terminology for. So it all kind of, married together, and obviously there's a lot of different viewpoints on what parts of the system have validity and which are kind of not as good. My personal view is whatever you find a positive use for is good, because if it helps with your communication with people, that I'd say, and you'll kind of see, you kind of hear this as a recurring theme in a lot of things if you listen to more things I say. Don't let anybody else tell you how you should think or feel about, whatever it is, including personality types. If you find a book that's called, The 4 Colors, I've actually encountered something that sort of broke personalities into colors, and you want to be like, there's the orange people and the blue people, whatever, and it's easy for you to remember that, and you can use that as a tool to help you with communication with people, and it works, then more power to you. And if some person comes along and wants to tell you, well, no, the color system is a outdated, trivial system that doesn't take into account the vast mental processes of you know what? Don't listen to those people. And I'm not saying that they might not have a valid point about some deeper ideas about something, but don't let them discourage you from using what works for you, is how I would put it. Because you'll encounter a lot of people that kind of have this idea of they're looking for some kind of superiority, where they can lord over people the fact that they've got all this intense knowledge, or books and books of all these things that they find important, but it may not actually be important to anybody else, and may not be useful for anybody else. So anyway, summing up, do what works for you. And I see from already that I've been kind of long-winded with my time here, so I'm probably going to split this particular video or ideas up into a couple of parts, because there are some things I want to get to here, and I don't want it to be super long. Anyway, back to the story of how I discovered personality types. My mother bought this book, Please Understand Me, and she made my brothers and me take the test that was in the back of it to try to determine our personality type. And to put it mildly, my initial reaction was, this is a bunch of crap. At that time I was, I believe, 19 or 20 years old. And so at that age, my idea was that basically psychology itself was a fake thing, a fake profession, something to bilk people out of money to get them to, oh, you got to come to therapy with me, and we'll make a breakthrough, and we'll learn all this stuff, and you give me hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars, and that's how I make my living. So I thought it was a bunch of garbage, and the psychologist that I had listened to and spent time with, there was, let's just say I had bad experiences with them. For various reasons, they were creepy and just weren't helpful at all in anything that was troubling me, and in some cases added to the problem. So at that age, at 20 years old, I looked at it as, okay, some dude that wrote a book, doesn't know anything about me. He might pretend he does, but I'm me, and I'm not some, I think in the original Please Understand Me, he used, like, I can't remember now if it was Greek. I think it was Greek, like, mythological names for the temperaments too. It was like the Prometheans and the Dionysians and stuff. And so that just made it worse, because I'm looking at it like, yeah, sure, I'm some Greek dude, all right, whatever you say. And the thing is, and this is another thing that if you don't know a lot of SPs, or you kind of don't understand what makes them tick, you may not have encountered this before, but if you do regularly experience SP type people, then this will come as no surprise to you. But my mother said that she wanted us to take this test before any of us read any of the book, because she didn't want it to, like, bias our responses to anything, or anything like that. And so, of course, once she said that, then the second that she was gone from the house, I, of course, found the book and decided to read up on it, because she told me not to. So, and the kind of what I did was, in the midst of my sort of loathing this concept of, this person could know anything about me, I actually, when it came time to take the test, tried to answer deliberately wrong, not the way I actually felt about some of the questions, because I thought whatever my mom had decided, because she said she thought what type, like for each of the three of us, my two brothers and I, she said she had an idea of what type she thought we were before we took it. So, of course, my idea was, okay, I'm going to screw her all up, because whatever it is she's thinking, I'm not going to end up as that. So my initial experience with the test was lying. Not entirely, not every question. I didn't answer like the exact opposite of myself or anything like that. But I definitely was messing with it. And the funny part actually is how close it was still to being accurate, even with me kind of messing with it, that it was still kind of somewhat on target, but not entirely. But the really funny part was that I ended up with T and F being tied, or where put X instead of a T or an F, and yeah, I'm like pretty as close to 100% F as you can be. I'm pretty much at the far end of the chart. I'm a very emotionally based person in pretty much everything. Never more than a few seconds away from laughing or crying, or things really affect me emotionally, and I don't really care about anything that I don't have an emotional connection with. So I'm about as F as you can get. Yet on the test, of course, by screwing with it, I ended up with the X instead of F or T. So that just gives you an idea. But anyway, so that in itself, like if somebody was observing this and knew what was going on, knew what was in my head, and then they probably would have typed me as an SP right there, just in the fact that my motivation was screw with the test and show her, That was what I was trying to do, rather than, like the NF view, which would have been like, I really want to use this to discover about myself, It was nothing like that. It was, I'll show you for thinking you can possibly understand me. So, I have more to say about that, but for various reasons I'm running out of time at the moment. So I'm going to kind of end this at part 1 and kind of do a part 2 and expound more. But the thing I wanted to say just about the Please Understand Me book is when I actually read, after we did the test and everything, and I read more about the 4 temperaments, reading the description of the SP temperament, I didn't think it fit me. Now, I didn't think any of the other 3 really fit me either, but probably of the 4 listed in the book, I probably most at the time felt I identified with the NF one because it focused on this kind of search for a purpose kind of thing, and I'm just 20 years old, and all 20-year-olds to a certain extent are searching for their purpose in life. You can have a 20-year-old that's really confident and says, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to do this, and has their whole life planned out ahead of them. But really, when it comes down to it, at that age, most people are still kind of searching for where's my place in the world, what do I want to do, do I want to have a family, do I want to, even if they don't spend a lot of time, not everybody's like the NFs where, they're evaluating that stuff constantly. But at 20, most people, they really are kind of asking a lot of those questions on a pretty regular basis, at least, every month or so. I mean, those kind of things come up a lot. So, and actually, to me, it wasn't that I necessarily strongly identified with the NF temperament. Again, like I said, my main emotion was these people can't type me. They can't possibly group me. I don't belong in your box, man. I'm my own person, all right? I'm a unique and stuff. Yeah, that was my kind of general view of it. So I wasn't looking to identify with any of these. I was reading it very skeptically. But reading the SP temperament, the number one reason that I didn't think, oh, this is me, the reason I was like, well, that's not me, I'm not one of those people, is because reading the description of it, I picked out things that sort of instantly created a stereotype for me. And it was the stereotype of people I'd known in high school that their entire motivation in life seemed to be to get drunk every weekend and then come back to school on Monday bragging about how drunk they were and how much they threw up. And that always seemed incredibly stupid to me. And I was never one of those people. And so reading this, looking at that, instantly kind of getting that image of, here, this is what an SP is. The kind of person that's just, hey, I'm going to see how wasted I can get, man. That's what I'm going to do this weekend. Hey, last weekend, I saw how wasted I was going to get, and then this next weekend, I'm going to do the same thing, because that's all I know how to do. Yeah, see, that's not me. It never was, even in high school. And I can get into more of that later as I make more videos. But anyway, that was the initial thought I had about SPs. And what I have noticed in recent years when I rediscovered temperament and personality type discussions is that there are a lot of people that have that image of SPs when they read those descriptions. And so what I kind of like to do in part 2 of this video, when I get to it, is to kind of debunk some of the stereotype. And there's a saying that all stereotypes or stereotypes exist for a reason. And like I said, there were people who fit that stereotype. But I guess what I'd like to do is kind of focus a little more on the fact that not everybody does, and focus more on what actually are the things that bind SPs and make us that. We really are what the fundamental things that we really all do have in common, versus the things that are kind of more like stereotypes of certain segments of the SP population. So that's what I'm going to do in part 2, and so stay tuned, because it'll get even more exciting than this was.